2.
Berthold RM74, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the very complex subject of knife sharpening. I think the most important thing to know is that there's lots of different ways to approach this, but it's important, I think, to really understand how the different processes can affect the end result, and also, of course, how important it is to have a sharp knife at all times, whether you're butchering proteins, slicing herbs. It's essential to have a sharp knife both for the quality of the product and quality of the work, but also the safety of the user. A sharper knife is easier to work with, creates less resistance, and certainly less stress. So here we have Japanese whetstones, and the reason they're called whetstones is because when they're used when they're wet, and that water helps provide a little lubrication for the knife to glide across the stones on. There are many different grits of stone. The lower the number, the coarser the grit. The higher the number, the finer the grit. Typically you'll start off with a low number grit such as a 1200 or a 1000 or even an 800, and finish on a higher number grit. This happens to be a 6000, but it goes all the way up to 8000, 10,000, 12,000. This is called a stone fixer, and this is used for a couple of things. It's important when you're using whetstones that they're always flat. See, they're pressed up against one another and they're flat, because what happens over a period of months or years of using whetstones is they start to sort of change the shape the way that you're running the knife across it, and you want to have as true a surface as possible. So this stone fixer is great for that. This is very coarse. So before each use and after each use, using the stone fixer to keep that stone nice and flat is really essential to the life of the stone, as well as the ability to properly sharpen your knife. So not only does the stone fixer help keep the stone flat, it also generates a little bit of grit, which helps in the sharpening process. So we use that on both this coarse stone, which is a 1200 grit, as well as this finer stone, which is the 6000 grit. Okay, now we'll start the sharpening process. The stones have been soaked in water for 45 minutes or so. We have our water available, so we can just keep them nice and moist. Stone fixer. See, I've got the stone set up on top of a towel, so it's easy. I'm not hitting my hand on the table beneath. Get good access, good even movement here. There's lots of different ways you can do this. I prefer to have the stone placed vertical for this type of movement. Some people prefer it to be this way, some at an angle. You'll find whatever works for you. And what's really important about sharpening a knife is maintaining the angle, the same angle, all the way through, whether you're at the tip, midway through, or at the end. The same angle is important. Different knives, different chefs have different preferences on the angle, whether it's a sharper angle or a wider angle. Typically something around 15 degrees is a good starting point. So the angle is very important, and it's very important to maintain that angle throughout the length of the knife, whether it's a long knife like this, or a short knife, or a chef's knife, or a slicing knife. That angle is very important. And then same for the back side. So these Western style knives are cut such that they're even on both sides, 50-50. Some of the Japanese knives can be 90-10 or 70-30, meaning that there's more edge on one side than the other. Today we're just going to talk about sharpening these Western style knives. So you want to make sure that you're sharpening evenly, so for every forward stroke there's a back stroke. Whether you do 10 forward, 10 backward, 6 forward, 6 backward, doesn't really matter, but you want to make sure that you're sharpening the knife evenly. Okay? So I like to start at the tip. Again, that angle stays the same. I start working down the length of the knife and back. On this forward motion, I'm applying pressure moving forward, but releasing it when I pull the knife back. because you want the pressure to be shaping the blade this way, not necessarily the other way around. So it's forward pressure, all the way down to the heel of the knife. It's really important to go all the way down, because a lot of times what happens over the years, if you forget to get all the way down there, you'll have a little curve, so when you're on the cutting board, part of your knife is not touching the cutting board. Now, on the back, it's applying pressure coming back and letting up going forward. See them all the way to the heel. And back to the tip. Doesn't really matter how fast or how slow you move, but what's important is keeping that angle. So you'll find a little bit of a rhythm. You can see this grit that's getting generated. That's good, because it means that you're sharpening your knife. So depending on the condition of your knife, you may do this anywhere between 5–10 minutes. If it's in really rough shape, maybe longer. For a lot of these Japanese knives, I like to start with a 1000 or a 1200 gritstone. Some of the heftier German-style knives can go down to maybe a 600 or 800 gritstone as a starting point. The next step is using the finishing stone. This doesn't feel like much in your hand. It's very, very smooth, but this helps to really ensure the longevity of the edge that you put on the knife. So this is a 6,000 grit stone, which is quite fine, but they do go higher, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000. Same thing applies here, using the stone fixer. Again, keeping that same angle on the knife that we did with the first stone. Same amount of pressure, moving forward, all the way to the end of the knife. And I like to spend usually 2 to 3 times the amount of time on the finishing stone as I do on the coarse stone. It really does do a great deal to keep the edge on the knife. So in terms of how frequently you need to sharpen your knife, it's kind of dependent on use. Professional chefs using their knives in professional kitchens certainly need to sharpen them much more often than I would imagine a home chef. Typically sharpen your knives a couple times a week, but it also depends on whether or not you're using a finishing stone. Finishing stone really helps prolong the edge of the knife. Slicing knives, because they're usually used for slicing proteins, tend to get sharper a little bit longer. Your chef's knife may see a little bit more wear and tear. With regard to using the steel, it's very simple, but again, there are so many different ways you can approach it. Some people like to use it up. Some people will turn away from them. One of the things that I started doing a while back was always just planting it on my towel, so it's always anchored there. And then same thing that when you're sharpening your knife, you want to maintain the same angle. So if you sharpen at a 45-degree angle, use your steel at a 45-degree angle. If you sharpen at a 15-degree angle or a 20-degree angle, use your steel at that same angle. It goes for both sides. Same thing where you want to use, for every 1 or 2 strokes on the right side of the steel, it's 1 or 2 strokes on the left side of the steel. So you're maintaining that 50-50 edge on your knife. And starting at the tip all the way to the end and back. And speed really doesn't matter. So if you go slowly or if you go quickly, you'll see that angle remains the same. And like I said, this doesn't really do any sharpening, but it removes those burrs that occur with constant use in a kitchen. So having a steel on your station is very important, and your knife will stay sharper a lot longer.